The smell of fresh flowers and polished wood filled the air as people started walking into Carnegie Hall. Tonight was special. One of the world's most famous piano players was about to perform, and every single seat was sold out. The golden lights made everything look magical, and you could feel the excitement in the air. Behind the curtains, Victor was getting ready. He was wearing an expensive black suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month. His hair was perfectly styled, and he had that look on his face that said he knew he was better than everyone else. Victor had been playing piano since he was 4 years old. He had won every competition, played in every famous concert hall, and had millions of fans around the world. But success had changed him. It made him think he was above regular people. While Victor was checking his reflection in the mirror for the 10th time, something caught his eye. There was a woman quietly working near his piano. She was wearing a simple blue uniform and had her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. This was Rosa, and she had been cleaning Carnegie Hall for 3 years now. Every day she would come in early, work late, and make sure everything was perfect for the performers and guests. Rosa was 45 years old and had come to America from a small town in El Salvador. She had 2 children back home that she was trying to bring to America, and every dollar she earned cleaning was saved for that dream. She worked at Carnegie Hall during the day and cleaned offices at night. Her hands were rough from all the work, but her heart was still soft and kind. As Rosa carefully dusted the piano bench, she moved with respect. She knew how important this instrument was. To her, it wasn't just wood and metal, it was something that could create beautiful music that touched people's souls. She had heard so many amazing performances while working here, and each one reminded her of something precious from her past. Victor watched Rosa work and felt annoyed. How dare someone like her touch his piano? He walked over with heavy steps that echoed in the quiet hall. Some early guests were already finding their seats, and they looked up when they heard Victor's footsteps. "Excuse me," Victor said in a voice that was meant to sound polite but came out cold and mean. "What do you think you're doing?" Rosa looked up surprised. She had seen Victor before but had never spoken to him. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm just cleaning. The concert starts soon and everything needs to be perfect." Victor laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes people feel small. "Perfect? You think someone like you knows what perfect means? This piano costs more than you'll make in your entire life. Your ... Common hands shouldn't even be near it." The words hit Rosa like a slap. She felt her cheeks get hot with embarrassment. Some of the people in the audience heard what Victor said, and they started whispering to each other. An older woman in the front row shook her head with disapproval. A young couple looked at each other with shocked expressions, but Victor wasn't done. He was enjoying the attention, and his voice got louder so more people could hear. "Do you even know what this instrument is? Have you ever heard real music in your life? Or do you only listen to whatever they play on the streets where you come from?" Rosa's hands started shaking a little, but she kept holding her cleaning cloth. She wanted to disappear, to run away from all the staring eyes, but she needed this job. Her children were counting on her. So she just stood there, looking down at the floor, while Victor continued his cruel words. "I bet you've never even been to a real concert," Victor continued, his voice getting meaner. "People like you probably think music comes from car radios and cheap speakers. You wouldn't understand true art if it hit you in the face." By now, more people in the audience were paying attention to what was happening. Some looked angry at Victor's behavior. Others looked embarrassed for Rosa. A few people started talking among themselves about how wrong this was. But nobody stood up to stop it. Everyone just watched. Victor's manager, a nervous man named Tom, came rushing over. He could see that this was getting out of hand. "Victor, perhaps we should focus on the performance," he whispered, trying to pull the pianist away, but Victor pushed Tom's hand away. He was having too much fun showing off his power. No, this is educational. Maybe this woman can learn something about real culture tonight. Though I doubt she has the intelligence to appreciate it." Rosa finally looked up at Victor. Her eyes were wet with tears, but there was something else there too. something that Victor didn't notice because he was too busy being cruel. It was the look of someone who had seen real pain in life, someone who understood things that Victor, for all his fame and money, had never experienced. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Rosa said quietly, her voice carrying a slight accent that made her words sound musical. "I will finish quickly and stay out of your way." Her calm response only made Victor more annoyed. He wanted her to fight back or cry or run away. Instead, she was being dignified, and somehow that made him look worse. "Stay out of my way? You should stay out of this entire building. This place is for people who understand culture, not for ... double quotes. He looked her up and down with disgust. Not for people like you." The silence in the hall was thick and uncomfortable. Even the people who were still walking in could feel that something was wrong. Conversation stopped. Programs stopped rustling. Everyone was watching this painful scene unfold. Tom tried again to get Victor to stop. "Victor, please, the show must go on. People paid good money to hear you play." Victor finally seemed to remember where he was. He straightened his jacket and looked around at all the faces staring at him. But instead of feeling ashamed, he felt proud. He thought he had just shown everyone how important and superior he was. "You're right, Tom," Victor said loudly. "These people came to hear real music from a real artist, not to watch the help pretend they belong here." He looked back at Rosa one more time. "You can stay and listen if you want. Maybe you'll learn something, though I doubt you'll understand any of it." Rosa nodded slowly and picked up her cleaning supplies. As she walked toward the back of the hall, some people watched her with sympathy. Others looked away, feeling guilty that they hadn't said anything to help her. Victor walked to his piano, sat down, and started playing a few warm-up scales. The notes filled the hall with beautiful sound, but somehow, after what had just happened, the music didn't feel as magical as it should have. The audience settled into their seats, but the excitement from earlier was gone. Instead, there was an uncomfortable feeling hanging in the air. People whispered to their companions about what they had just witnessed. Some wondered if they should have spoken up. Others felt sorry for the cleaning lady who had been treated so badly. As the lights dimmed and Victor prepared to begin his concert, Rosa found a spot in the very back corner of the hall. She stood quietly, still holding her cleaning cloth, and waited for the music to begin. She had no idea that this night would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone in that concert hall. Victor sat at his beautiful piano and cracked his knuckles. The sound echoed through the quiet hall like tiny gunshots. He looked out at the audience with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. These people had paid hundreds of dollars to see him perform, and he was going to give them a show they would never forget. But first he had something else on his mind. He stood up from the piano bench and walked back toward where Rosa was standing. She had found a spot near the wall in the back, trying to make herself invisible. Her cleaning supplies were neatly arranged beside her, and she was holding her hands together in front of her, hoping Victor would just ignore her and start his concert. But Victor wasn't done with her yet. The way she had stayed so calm and polite had bothered him. He wanted to see her break. He wanted everyone to see the difference between someone like him and someone like her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced loudly, his voice carrying across the entire hall. "Before we begin tonight's performance, I think we should take a moment to appreciate something." The audience looked confused. This wasn't how concerts usually started. People stopped talking and turned their attention to Victor. Some were still whispering about what had happened earlier, and now they were worried about what might happen next. Victor walked closer to Rosa, making sure everyone could see both of them clearly. "This lovely lady here has been working so hard to clean our concert hall. But I'm wondering, do you think she has any idea what kind of music we're about to hear tonight?" Rosa felt her heart start beating faster. She could feel hundreds of eyes looking at her. Some people in the audience looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and frowning. Others seemed curious about what Victor was doing, but nobody spoke up to stop him. "Tell me," Victor said, speaking directly to Rosa but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Have you ever heard of Chopin, Bach, Mozart?" Or do those names mean nothing to you? Rosa's mouth felt dry. She wanted to answer, but she was afraid that anything she said would just make things worse. I have heard some classical music, sir, she said quietly. Victor laughed and turned to face the audience. She's heard some classical music. Isn't that wonderful? His voice was dripping with sarcasm. I bet she heard it playing in the background at a restaurant or maybe in an elevator. Some people in the audience started looking really uncomfortable now. A woman in the third row whispered something angry to her husband. An elderly man near the front was shaking his head with disgust. But still, nobody stood up to defend Rosa. Victor was enjoying himself. He felt powerful, important. You know what I think, he continued. I think people like her hear real music the same way a dog hears a beautiful speech. The sounds go into their ears, but they don't understand what it really means. Rosa felt like she might start crying, but she forced herself not to. She had learned to be strong during the hard times in her life. When she was young and had to leave her home country because of the war, when she arrived in America with nothing, when she had to work 3 jobs just to survive. She had faced worse things than this cruel man, and she would face this too. Maybe, Victor said, getting an idea that made his eyes light up with meanness, maybe we should test this theory. Tell me, what do you think classical music is about? What do you think it means? The question hung in the air like a trap. Rosa knew that no matter how she answered, Victor would find a way to make fun of her. If she said something simple, he would call her stupid. If she said something thoughtful, he would say she was trying to sound smarter than she really was. I think, Rosa said slowly, choosing her words carefully, that music is about feelings, about the human heart. Victor burst out laughing, and some people in the audience gasped at how cruel he sounded. The human heart, how touching, how simple. He turned back to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear some of the most complex, sophisticated music ever written. Music that requires years of study to truly understand. Music that represents the highest achievement of human culture. And this woman thinks it's just about feelings. A young man in the audience started to stand up, looking angry, but his girlfriend pulled him back down. Don't make a scene, she whispered. Even though she looked upset too, Victor walked back toward his piano, but he wasn't done talking. You know what the real tragedy is? People like her get to work in a place like this, surrounded by greatness every day, and they learn nothing from it. It's like giving pearls to pigs. The comparison was so mean and unfair that several people in the audience actually gasped out loud. A woman near the back called out, "That's enough." But Victor pretended not to hear her. Tom, Victor's manager, was standing in the wings looking terrified. He knew this was going very badly, but he also knew that Victor was too stubborn and too full of himself to listen to reason right now. Tom was already thinking about how to handle the bad publicity this would probably create. But you know what? Victor said, spreading his arms wide like he was being generous. I'm feeling charitable tonight. This woman can stay and listen to the entire concert. Maybe, just maybe, some tiny bit of real culture will sink into her mind. Maybe she learned the difference between actual art and whatever noise she's used to hearing. He walked back to Rosa one more time, leaning close enough that only she could hear his next words. Pay attention tonight, he whispered. Watch how a real artist performs. Maybe you'll understand why people like me are special and people like you are. Well, you'll understand your place. Rosa looked directly into Victor's eyes for just a moment. He expected to see fear or anger or hurt. Instead, he saw something that confused him. She looked almost sorry for him, like she understood something about him that he didn't understand about himself. Thank you for letting me stay, Rosa said simply. I promise I won't disturb anyone. Victor walked back to his piano feeling slightly unsettled, though he couldn't figure out why. He had just shown an entire concert hall how important and superior he was. He had put this cleaning woman in her place. So why did he feel like something had just gone wrong? The audience was buzzing with uncomfortable energy. People were whispering angrily to each other. Some were looking at Rosa with sympathy, Others were looking at Victor with disgust. The magical feeling that usually filled a concert hall before a great performance was completely gone. Replaced by tension and embarrassment, Victor sat down at his piano and placed his hands on the keys. He tried to focus on the music he was about to play, but he kept thinking about the way Rosa had looked at him, like she knew something he didn't, like she wasn't impressed by his fame or his talent or his expensive clothes. As he prepared to begin the concert, Victor told himself that he had done the right thing. He had shown everyone the natural order of things. The talented and the ordinary, the cultured and the simple, the important and the invisible. He had no idea that he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The lights dimmed slowly, and Carnegie Hall fell into the kind of deep silence that only happens before something magical is about to begin. Victor placed his fingers on the piano keys, took a deep breath, and started to play. The first notes of Chopin's beautiful music filled the air like liquid gold, flowing through every corner of the grand hall. But something was different tonight. Usually, when Victor played, the audience would be completely lost in the music from the very first note. Tonight, though, people seemed distracted. They kept glancing back toward the corner where Rosa was standing. The cruel words Victor had spoken were still echoing in their minds. Making it hard to enjoy the performance, Rosa stood perfectly still in her spot at the back of the hall. She had positioned herself where she wouldn't block anyone's view or disturb anyone. Her cleaning supplies were neatly arranged beside her, and her hands were folded quietly in front of her. But as Victor's fingers danced across the keys, something incredible started to happen. The music seemed to wash over Rosa like warm sunshine after a cold rain. Her eyes closed softly, and a single tear rolled down her cheek, then another. Soon, tears were flowing freely down her face, but she wasn't crying because she was sad or hurt. She was crying because the music was so beautiful, so perfect, that it touched something deep inside her soul. A woman sitting in the back row noticed Rosa first. She nudged her husband and whispered, "Look at her. Look how she's responding to the music." The husband turned around and saw Rosa's face, completely transformed by the emotion of Chopin's melody. Her expression was pure and peaceful, like someone who understood every single note on a level that went beyond just hearing. As Victor continued playing, more people in the audience began to notice Rosa. She wasn't just standing there listening. She was experiencing the music with her whole being. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the piece. When the music got soft and gentle, her shoulders relaxed. When it grew powerful and dramatic, she stood a little taller, and then something really amazing happened. Rosa's right hand, which had been resting at her side, began to move. Very quietly, very carefully, her fingers started moving as if she was playing along with Victor. She wasn't making any sound, of course, but anyone watching could see that her fingers knew exactly which keys Victor was pressing. Her hand movements were perfectly timed with the music, as if she had played this piece many times before. Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman sitting in the fifth row, had been watching Rosa for several minutes. Mrs. Chun had been teaching piano for over 50 years, and she knew what she was seeing. Rosa wasn't just pretending to play along. Her fingers were hitting the exact same notes as Victor at exactly the right time. This woman knew this piece of music by heart. During a quiet moment in the music, Mrs. Chun leaned over to her granddaughter. "That woman back there," she whispered. "She's playing along perfectly. Those aren't the movements of someone who's just pretending." The granddaughter turned around to look, and her eyes went wide. "Grandma, do you think she actually knows how to play piano?" "I think she knows how to play this piece better than most people who call themselves pianists," Mrs. Chun whispered back. Word started spreading quietly through the audience. People began turning around to watch Rosa, fascinated by what they were seeing. A man in the front row tapped his wife's shoulder and pointed toward the back. "Watch her hands," he mouthed silently. Victor was completely focused on his performance and had no idea what was happening behind him. He was playing beautifully, as always, but tonight his music felt somehow hollow. The cruel things he had said earlier kept creeping into his mind, distracting him from the pure joy he usually felt when performing. Meanwhile, Rosa was lost in a world of memories. This piece of music, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, had been special to her for many years. As she listened to Victor play it, she remembered the first time she had learned it herself. She remembered practicing it over and over until her fingers could play it perfectly, even in her sleep. She remembered the last time she had played it on a piano far away, in a different life that seemed like a beautiful dream now. As the music reached its most emotional moments, Rosa's whole body seemed to sway gently with the melody. Her face showed every feeling that Chopin had put into his composition, the joy, the sadness, the hope, the longing. She understood this music not just with her mind, but with her heart and soul. A young music student named Alex was sitting in the middle section of the hall. He had been studying piano for 10 years and knew this piece very well. As he watched Rosa, he realized something that made his jaw drop. "She's not just following along," he whispered to his friend. "She's anticipating what comes next. She knows this piece inside and out." Alex's friend, who didn't know much about classical music, looked confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alex said quietly, "that she's played this piece before, probably many, many times. You can't move your fingers like that unless you've actually learned the music." The friend looked back at Rosa with new understanding. "But Victor said she doesn't know anything about classical music." "Victor," Alex said with disgust, "is an idiot." As the first half of the concert continued, more and more people became aware of Rosa. Some were watching her openly now, no longer trying to hide their curiosity. Others were sneaking glances at her whenever Victor reached a particularly difficult part of the music, amazed to see her fingers moving perfectly along with every complex passage. But Rosa was completely unaware of all the attention she was getting. She was somewhere else entirely, transported by the music to a time and place where she had been young and full of dreams, where she had spent hours every day practicing piano, believing that music would be her life's work, where she had been respected and valued for her talent, not looked down on because of her circumstances. When Victor finished the first piece and the audience applauded, Rosa opened her eyes as if waking up from a beautiful dream. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and stood quietly, waiting for the next piece to begin. She had no idea that dozens of people in the audience were now looking at her with completely different eyes than they had an hour ago. Mrs. Chun made a decision. During the brief pause between pieces, she got up from her seat and walked toward the back of the hall. Her granddaughter followed, curious about what her grandmother was planning to do. Mrs. Chun approached Rosa gently, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me, dear," she said in a kind voice. "I couldn't help but notice how beautifully you were responding to the music. You seem to know that piece very well." Rosa looked surprised and a little embarrassed that someone had been watching her. "I'm sorry if I was distracting," she said quietly. "I was trying to stay out of everyone's way." "Oh, you weren't distracting at all?" Mrs. Chun assured her. "Quite the opposite. It was beautiful to watch someone who truly understands the music. Tell me, have you studied piano before?" Rosa hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should answer. She glanced toward the stage where Victor was preparing for his next piece, then looked back at the kind face of Mrs. Chun. "A long time ago," Rosa said softly. "In another life." Mrs. Chun smiled warmly at Rosa's quiet answer. There was something in the way Rosa had said, "in another life," that told her there was much more to this story. "Would you mind if my granddaughter and I sat back here with you for a while? I'd love to hear more about your musical background." Rosa looked nervous. She wasn't used to people being interested in her story, especially not in a place like this. "I don't want to bother you. You paid good money to sit in those nice seats up front." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chun said, settling into an empty chair near Rosa. "Sometimes the best conversations happen in the back of the room." Her granddaughter Lisa sat down too, looking curious and excited. As Victor began his next piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the three women listened together. But Mrs. Chin found herself watching Rosa more than the performance on stage. Once again, Rosa's fingers moved silently along with the music. and her face showed that she understood every emotion Beethoven had put into the composition. You know? This one too, Mrs. Chun observed quietly. Rosa nodded, not taking her eyes off Victor's hands. Beethoven was angry when he wrote this, she whispered. People think it's just a pretty, sad song, but there's so much fire underneath the gentle parts. Mrs. Chin's eyebrows went up in surprise. That was exactly the kind of deep understanding that only came from years of serious musical study. Where did you learn to play? She asked gently. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding whether to share her story. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I studied at the National Conservatory in San Salvador. I was going to be a music teacher. Was going to be? Lisa asked softly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears, but she kept watching Victor play. The war came. Everything changed. I had to leave my country, my piano, my students, everything. Mrs. Chion felt her heart break a little. She had taught music her whole life and couldn't imagine having to give it up. How long ago was that? 15 years? Rosa said. I haven't played a real piano since then. I practice on a table sometimes. When I'm alone in my apartment, I move my fingers and try to remember how the keys felt. Lisa gasped softly. You haven't played piano in 15 years? Rosa shook her head. When I came to America, I tried to find work teaching music. But my degree from El Salvador didn't count here. My English wasn't good enough. I had no money to go back to school. So I started cleaning offices at night in buildings during the day. I told myself it was just temporary, but quotes. She shrugged sadly. 15 years went by very fast. Mrs. Chun was amazed. Here was a classically trained musician, someone who clearly understood music at a professional level, and she was being treated like she knew nothing about culture. It was heartbreaking and infuriating at the same time. Do you still remember how to play? Lisa asked. Rosa smiled for the first time that evening. Music isn't something you forget. It lives in your heart, in your fingers, in your soul. Every night when I clean these halls, I listen to the rehearsals. Every day I hear the music in my head. I may not have touched a piano in 15 years, but I still practice every day. As Victor finished the Beethoven piece, Mrs. Chun made a decision. She stood up and walked toward the front of the hall, leaving Rosa and Lisa looking confused. Grandma, where are you going? Lisa called softly, but Mrs. Chun was already moving through the rows of seats. During the brief pause between pieces, Mrs. Chun approached one of the concert hall's directors, a man named Robert who she had known for many years. She whispered something in his ear, pointing back toward Rosa. Robert looked surprised, then intrigued. Meanwhile, other audience members had been having their own conversations about Rosa, the young music student. Alex had been talking to people around him about what he had observed. I'm telling you, she knows that music better than most professionals I've seen. He insisted to anyone who would listen. An older gentleman named Professor Williams, who taught music history at a nearby university, had also been watching Rosa carefully. He turned to his wife and said, That woman back there understands classical music on a level that takes decades to develop. Either she's had serious training or she's some kind of musical genius. Word was spreading through the audience like ripples in a pond. People were turning around to look at Rosa, whispering to their companions and sharing their observations. The atmosphere in the hall was changing. What had started as an uncomfortable evening because of Victor's cruelty was becoming something else entirely, a growing sense of anticipation and curiosity about the quiet woman in the back. Victor, still focused on his performance, had no idea what was happening behind him. He was preparing for his final piece of the first half, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece he had played earlier, and the same piece that had moved Rosa to tears. Mrs. Chun returned to her seat next to Rosa, just as Victor began the Chopin piece again. This time, however, Rosa's reaction was even stronger. As the familiar melody filled the hall, she closed her eyes and tears began flowing down her cheeks immediately. This piece, she whispered to Mrs. Chun, was the last thing I played before I left my country. I was giving a recital at the conservatory, and this was my final performance. I played it for my students, my colleagues, my family. I didn't know it would be the last time I would ever perform for people who understood how much music meant to me. Mrs. Chung felt tears in her own eyes now. What happened after that? 3 days later, the soldiers came to our town. My family. And I had to pack whatever we could carry and leave. I wanted to take my music books, but there was no room. I could only take clothes and food. Rosa's voice was breaking with emotion. I left my piano, my sheet music, my whole life behind. As Victor played the most emotional part of the ballade, Rosa's silent finger movements became more obvious. She was playing along perfectly, her muscle memory intact after all these years. Several people in the nearby seats were now openly watching her instead of Victor. I used to dream about playing this piece again, Rosa continued, her eyes still closed. For years I dreamed about sitting at a piano and feeling the keys under my fingers. But after so long, I thought maybe I had forgotten how. Maybe my hands wouldn't remember. I don't think you've forgotten anything, Mrs. Chun said firmly. Your hands remember perfectly. I can see it. When Victor finished the piece, the audience applauded as usual. But something unusual happened. Mrs. Chun stood up and started clapping while looking directly at Rosa, not at Victor. Then Lisa stood up too, then Professor Williams and his wife. Then Alex, the young music student. Soon a section of the audience was standing and applauding while looking toward the back of the hall. Toward Rosa, other people looked confused, not understanding what was happening. But those who had been watching Rosa knew exactly why they were clapping. Rosa looked shocked and embarrassed by the attention. She hadn't done anything except listen to music and remember her past. But to the people who had witnessed her silent performance, who had seen her deep understanding and emotional connection to the music, she had done something beautiful and inspiring. Victor finally noticed that something strange was happening. He looked out at the audience and saw that many people seemed to be looking toward the back of the hall instead of at him. He followed their gaze and saw Rosa standing there, looking overwhelmed and confused by all the attention. For the first time all evening, Victor felt uncertain. What was happening? Why were people looking at the cleaning lady instead of celebrating his performance? He had just played one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire flawlessly, and people were ignoring him. During intermission, something unprecedented happened. Instead of staying in their seats or going to the lobby, dozens of audience members got up and walked toward the back of the hall. They wanted to meet Rosa, to talk to her, to learn more about the woman who had shown such a profound understanding of the music. They all loved. Victor watched in growing confusion and anger as people surrounded Rosa, shaking her hand and asking her questions. This was supposed to be his night, his moment of triumph. Instead, everyone seemed more interested in a cleaning lady than in his artistic genius. He had no idea that his night was about to become even more surprising. Victor stood at his piano, watching in complete disbelief as more and more people gathered around Rosa. The intermission was supposed to be about him, about his incredible performance. Instead, everyone seemed fascinated by the cleaning lady. He had embarrassed earlier. His face was getting red with anger and confusion. What is going on back there? Victor demanded, speaking to Tom, his manager, who had rushed over looking worried. Tom had been listening to the conversations in the audience, and what he heard made him very nervous. Victor, I think we might have a problem. People are saying, that woman knows a lot about classical music? More than you thought. That's impossible, Victor snapped. She's just a cleaning lady. She probably doesn't even know how to read music. But Tom had heard Mrs. Chun telling other people about Rosa's background. He had heard Professor Williams explaining to his colleagues that Rosa was moving her fingers perfectly along with the music. The story was spreading through the entire audience, and it was making Victor look very bad. Meanwhile, Rosa found herself surrounded by kind faces and warm voices. She had never experienced anything like this before. In her 15 years of cleaning buildings and being invisible to most people, nobody had ever been interested in her story or treated her with such respect. Would you be willing to play something For us? Mrs. Chun asked gently. I think everyone here would love to hear you perform. Rosa's eyes went wide with fear. Oh no, I couldn't. I haven't played in front of people for so many years. And this isn't my place, this is Mr. Victor's concert. But you know the music? Said Alex, the young music student. I've been watching you all night. You know those pieces better than most professionals I've seen. Professor Williams nodded in agreement. My dear, talent like yours doesn't disappear just because you haven't had access to a piano. Music lives in your soul, not just in your fingers. Rosa shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. I'm just here. To clean, I don't want to cause any trouble. But the crowd around her was growing. More people had heard about what was happening and came to see for themselves. They formed a gentle circle around Rosa, all of them looking at her with curiosity and kindness, such a different feeling from the cruel stares Victor had caused earlier. Robert, the concert hall director, pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Chun had told him Rosa's story, and he was amazed. In all his years working at Carnegie Hall, he had never heard anything quite like this. Ma'am, Robert said politely to Rosa, would you consider playing just one piece for us? As someone who has dedicated his life to music, I would be honored. To hear you perform, Victor couldn't stand it anymore. He marched over to the group, his face dark with anger. What is this nonsense? This is my concert. I am the artist here. This woman is hired help, nothing more. The crowd turned to look at Victor, and for the first time all evening, their faces were not filled with admiration. They looked disappointed in him. Some looked disgusted. Mr. Victor, Mrs. Chun said firmly, this woman is a classically trained musician who studied at a conservatory. She had to give up her career because of war, not because she lacked talent. Victor laughed, but it sounded forced and mean. You're all being fooled by some sob story. Anyone can claim they used to be a musician. Then let her prove it, called out Alex from the crowd. If you're so sure she can't play, what's the harm in letting her try? The suggestion spread through the group like wildfire. Yes, let her play, someone called out. Give her a chance, said another voice. Victor found himself trapped. If he said no, he would look like he was afraid of being shown up by a cleaning lady. If he said yes, and Rosa actually could play, well, he didn't want to think about that possibility. Fine, Victor said through gritted teeth. Let her embarrass herself, but when she fails, I don't want to hear any more of this ridiculous nonsense. Rosa felt terrified. Her hands were shaking and her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She looked around at all the expectant faces, then at the beautiful piano that had seemed so far out of reach just hours ago. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, Mrs. Chun said softly, taking Rosa's hand. Music doesn't leave us. It's still there, waiting for you. Slowly, Rosa walked toward the piano. Each step felt like a dream. The audience followed, filling the seats again to watch what was about to happen. The energy in the hall was electric. With anticipation, Victor stood to the side, his arms crossed, expecting to watch Rosa fail and prove his point. But as Rosa sat down at the piano bench and placed her hands over the keys, something in her posture changed. Her back straightened. Her nervous expression became calm and focused. Suddenly, she didn't look like a frightened cleaning lady anymore. She looked like a musician coming home. Rosa took a deep breath and began to play. Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece Victor had performed earlier, the same piece that held so many memories for her. From the very first note, it was clear that something magical was happening. Rosa's hands moved across the keys with perfect technique, but more than that, they moved with incredible emotion and understanding. Every phrase of the music told a story. Every chord carried the weight of her experiences, the joy of her youth, the pain of losing everything, the longing for the life she had left behind. The audience sat in complete silence, mesmerized. This wasn't just good playing, this was extraordinary. Rosa brought something to the music that Victor, for all his technical skill, had never been able to achieve. She played with the heart of someone who had truly lived, who had lost everything and found beauty anyway. Victor's confident expression slowly changed to shock, then to something that looked almost like fear. Rosa was playing his piece the same notes he had played, but somehow her version was more beautiful, more moving, more real than his had been. As Rosa reached the most difficult part of the piece, her fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking skill. 15 years without touching a piano hadn't dulled her ability at all. If anything, all those years of silent practice, of hearing music in her head and moving her fingers on tables, had somehow made her connection to the music even deeper. Tears was streaming down Rosa's face as she played, but she never missed a note. She was remembering her last performance 15 years ago, but she was also creating something new. This wasn't just the music Chopin had written. This was Rosa's story, told through the piano keys. When she reached the final, gentle notes of the piece, the hall was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Rosa held her hands above the keys for a moment, then slowly lowered them to her lap. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The silence was complete and profound. Then the applause began. Not polite concert applause, but the kind of thunderous, emotional applause that happens when people have witnessed something truly special. The entire audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering and wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Chin was crying openly. Professor Williams was shaking his head in amazement. Alex was jumping up and down, shouting, "Incredible! Absolutely incredible!" Rosa sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. She had forgotten how it felt to share music with people, to touch their hearts through the keys. It was like coming back to life after being asleep for 15 years. Victor stood frozen, his face pale with shock. He had been completely, utterly wrong about Rosa. Not only was she a trained musician, she was a better musician than he was. Her performance had shown him something he had never understood, that real artistry came not from privilege or fame, but from the depth of human experience. As the applause continued, Rosa stood up from the piano and walked quietly toward her cleaning supplies. She had done what they asked, and now she wanted to return to her place in the shadows, but the audience wouldn't let her disappear. They surrounded her again, this time with even more respect and admiration than before. They wanted to know her story, to understand how someone with such incredible talent had ended up invisible for so long. Victor slowly walked over to where Rosa was standing. The crowd parted to let him through, curious about what he would say. When he reached Rosa, he looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he did something he had never done before in his entire career. He bowed deeply to Rosa, showing her the respect that one musician gives to another who has truly moved them. "I was wrong," Victor said quietly, his voice barely audible in the hushed hall. "I was completely, terribly wrong. Please forgive me." Rosa looked at Victor with the same gentle expression she had worn all evening. "Music teaches us about forgiveness," she said simply. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them." The audience erupted in applause once more, not just for Rosa's incredible performance, but for her gracious response to the man who had tried to humiliate her. That night changed everything for both Rosa and Victor. Victor learned that true artistry had nothing to do with status or superiority, and everything to do with the human heart. And Rosa discovered that even after 15 years of silence, her music had never really left her at all.